I'm Shannon Ireland, your host of a Healthy Push podcast. I struggled with anxiety, panic disorder, and agoraphobia for 15 years. Everything used to be hard for me. Even just driving 5 minutes from my house used to feel impossible. But now I absolutely live for travel and adventure, and I experience lots of peace and joy. I've not only reclaimed my life, but I've helped hundreds of others to do the same. Here, we stop managing anxiety and instead we create a healthy relationship with it. One where you say goodbye to the anxious thoughts, symptoms, panic attacks, and fears, and you actually live your life. Forget complicated strategies, quick fixes, or the same old hacks you've heard 100 times before. Each week, I'll bring you simple, actionable advice and honest conversations that lead to real, long-term healing. You aren't just an anxious person, my friend. There are reasons why you're struggling with anxiety, and these are things you can fix and heal from. And this is where that journey begins. Welcome. You're right where you're meant to be. All right, hello, and welcome back to a Healthy Push podcast. Today's conversation is one I have been really excited about because it touches on something so many of us experience, but often don't fully understand. Chronic pain, chronic symptoms, and bodies that seem to stay stuck in this distress, even when we're doing, quote, all the right things. So today I'm joined by Nicole Sachs. She's a licensed clinical social worker and creator of JournalSpeak, a powerful therapeutic writing practice that helps people heal chronic pain and symptoms by addressing the emotional root beneath them, which I freaking love. And we're going to talk about that. So Nicole has her own journey with chronic pain. We're going to start there because I just think that that's going to give us a good segue into this whole bigger conversation. We're going to talk about what chronic symptoms mean and how suppressing emotions impacts the body and why the body isn't broken and betraying us, and how practices like JournalSpeak can help create real, lasting healing. So this conversation is really going to be about safety, truth, and learning to listen to the messages our body are sending rather than trying to push them away and silence them. So Nicole, welcome. I am so grateful to have you here with me.
I'm really excited to be here, and that's a great intro because I can use that to jump into a lot of really helpful places.
I love that. I'm so excited. So let's start. What was your journey with chronic pain?
So, I'm going to start by saying, just because we just had this conversation before we jumped on air, that I'm going to tell you about my journey with chronic pain. However, in the 25 years since that I have been in practice and writing books and all the things that I do, I've really discovered that chronic pain is a placeholder. The word pain is a placeholder because so many people in my community, myself included, have cycled through different pain symptoms like digestive issues or migraines or all over body aches or skin issues, cycled into anxiety, panic attacks, OCD, agoraphobia, just so many different manifestations of things that are all coming from the same genesis, which is nervous system dysregulation and not understanding how to move our bodies out of that loop of neural pathways that keeps us in fight or flight. So I'm just kind of laying that out because oftentimes when I'm having conversations with new audiences, they're confused because they hear the phrase chronic pain and they're like, oh, okay, Nicole, I get it. I really appreciate it, but I don't have chronic pain. I have an anxiety disorder, or I'm depressed, or I have skin issues that are like owning me, or fatigue. I have chronic fatigue, or I have long COVID. So I want everyone to understand you qualify no matter who you are, because this is not so much a problem. This is a quality of the human condition, and none of us get out of that. And when we understand it as such, and when we kind of soften and understand that nothing I am saying ever is that the pain is in your head, is that you're hysterical, if you're overreacting, you're too sensitive, you're making it up, or you're at fault. Those are barriers to this incredible transformative work that I never want people to be blocking themselves from. So, okay, I said that. And so now everybody can invite themselves in and sit down and know that what I'm about to say is simply a compassionate, new in some ways, but as old as the hills paradigm of the connection and the dance between the mind and the body and how every human being is affected by it and every part of the body and every system in the body is affected by it. So, having said that, my journey began officially when I was in college, but actually, since we're kind of also touching into the whole world of anxiety, I was the most anxious child. I am a hyper vigilant. I am built anxious. Was an insomniac since I was in second grade. I mean, like hardcore memories of watching the clock flip through those numbers. I'm a 1972 born child, so in the '80s, they had those clock radios, and when the minutes would literally go flip, flip, and I remember just, like, in a panic, in a terror, watching them flip all night, not being able to stop my brain. So, like, this isn't just about my back pain that began when I was in college. This is an entire history of being a person that is just my sensibility, my nature is very vigilant, very anxious, very paying attention all the time to, everything that's going on. So, okay. So having said that, I was in college and my back went out completely. Like I couldn't walk. And I was in such a situation that my parents had to come and get me and bring me home a couple weeks before finals. And I was, as any responsible parent would do, I underwent all the tests. So x rays, MRIs, orthopedic surgery consults. I was being helped to the bathroom. Like this was not a small thing in my life. And I was 19 and, so when my tests came back and we were into the orthopedist office, he kind of put my film up on the screen and he said to me in front of my very terrified mother, "You have a condition called degenerative spondylolisthesis, and you have a very, very severe case. And this will mean that you will not make it till 40 without spinal fusion surgery, which will limit your mobility for life, which will require an extended recovery. But lucky you, you're 19 and you're otherwise healthy. So you don't have to do that yet. But here's the recipe for living that will keep you from damaging your back so extremely that it will be basically your fault that you're like disabled. No more travel, no more exercise, no more sports, no more riding in the car for more than an hour because the bumping motion of the car could destabilize your back. Very specific sleeping positions. And then the kicker, I don't know this guy's name, but he said to a 19-year-old, the likelihood that you'll have biological children is slim to none because the weight of the baby will be so destabilizing. So, like, I'm a freshman in college
Yeah.
hearing about a rather horrible prognosis for my life. And, you know, all I know about that time was that I listened and I took it in as much as I could. And I did what I need. They put like a handicapped sticker on my car and I was able to drive to my classes. And I went from acute pain to chronic pain with enough steroids and muscle relaxers. And I remember I was taking like, thank God this was before the hardcore opioid epidemic. So they were giving me codeine, but luckily I didn't become a drug addict because so many kids do who have like sports injuries or whatever. So anyway, I go back to college, I live my life. And there was a part of me that just went into denial. I certainly was not ready to think about the fact that I might not have a biological child. That was a crazy thing to say to me because I was one of those kids that would swaddle up my stuffed animals. Like I wanted babies and I wanted my babies. And it was actually very specific because I was an only child. So I always like wanted a sibling. I wanted someone to look like me. I wanted someone to relate to me. And I thought, really, one day I'm gonna have children and that will be that for me. Anyway, so it was a major deal. And in this is a long story, so I won't go all the way into the whole thing right now, but in the by and by, I got my undergraduate degree in psychology. I was getting my master's degree in social work, planning to be a clinician, planning to be a therapist. And I came upon the work of Dr. John Sarno, which some people in your community may have heard of. He was for 50 years an attending physician at the Rusk Center for Rehabilitation in NYU Medical Center. And he was the grandfather of mind body medicine. And essentially, his theories were yes, you have all sorts of structural abnormalities that people can find on tests. Yes, there are gut microbiome analyses and different genetic proclivities and all these things that people are told that cause them to understand and to integrate themselves as a person who's sick, broken, um, beyond help. And his theory was many of these things, and this is his term, are normal abnormalities. So it doesn't mean that my back is straight up normal. My spine doesn't look like the skeleton in the third grade health class. You know, I have a unique situation, just like I look different on the outside from people. We all look different on the inside. And so that theory helped me, at least for a moment, put my fear aside and say, let me learn. Let me learn what mind body science is about. Let me learn what nervous system regulation is about. And so, starting there, it was a lifelong journey that brings us all the way to today, where I decided to set aside all of the dramatic negative information about what I might or might not become. Like I said, it's a long story, but I started as his patient. I became his mentee when I was all credentialed. We became colleagues. We lectured together for years at NYU until his retirement, and then he passed away. And I had a private practice by then. He would be referring into my practice. So we really became colleagues. And when he died, he really just handed me the baton and he said, do your best, because my life is completely defined by my unwillingness to believe that I would be limited for life. I have 3 children. I exercised till the day they were born. They're now 23, 21, and 18. They're not even children anymore. And so anyway, what I have done is I've evolved all his theories, and that's where we get to JournalSpeak and all the ways I help people around the world, but that's the basic of my story.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think what I want to dig into is this mind body science because I think I understand, but I would love the listeners to understand like, what does that mean to you? How do you practice? Like, what did you take from him that you were like, this is good stuff? Like, people need to know about this and understand this.
Yes. Okay. So basically, I was a psychology student. I was by the time I met him, I was almost already had my master's. So I understood in a basic way that we are affected by anything that emotionally touches us. And so the best way I can describe it is this. I could be lecturing to a room of 1,000 people and I could say, raise your hand if you've ever had a really stressful day, you're totally overwhelmed, everything was coming at you, and you got a headache. Okay, so everybody in the room raises their hand. I don't know anyone who's like said, I've never had a headache from a stressful, overwhelming day. And I said, okay. Keep your hand up if you ran to the ER for a CT scan because you were sure you had a brain tumor. And of course, everybody laughs and their hands go down. And I say to them with all the love in my heart, because there is no judgment here, this is a very compassionate process. I said, see, what I'm about to teach you, you already believe. You already believe that emotional stimuli cause physical conditions. You already believe that you could get bad news or go through a terrible breakup and you lose your appetite. You're not running to a gastroenterologist for an upper GI because what's wrong with me that I don't want to eat? You know, you've had an emotional thing that is happening in your life. It affects your appetite. You've all heard of a comedian about to go on stage and they run to the bathroom and throw up. You don't think, oh, they've just got a terrible stomach virus. You think they're really nervous. They're really anxious. They're really scared. It affected their stomach and they lost their lunch. Like, this is the way the human being works. And so when we start learning about mind body science, the first thing you need to know is you already know mind body science. You already know that many emotional stimuli cause physical reactions. So we start there. We start there. This is not unfamiliar territory. But the problem is when anything becomes chronic in any way, whether it be panic, anxiety, or back pain or migraines, or many other things, the epidemic of chronic pain is not pain, it's fear. Because all the fear and meaning that we place on the thing that is wrong with us, the thing that is broken, becomes the catalyst for more pain and symptoms and fatigue, etc. So the way it works is that the neuroscience behind how human beings function is we are built to survive. Everyone's heard of fight, flight, or freeze. We are either in fight or flight, or I'm going to pare it down because it's easier for conversation. We're either in fight or flight or we're in rest and repair. There are obviously different levels of this, but honestly, in many ways, we are not different from all of our animal cousins. So if you are a gazelle and you are grazing and drinking at the watering hole, and the lion comes through the savannah, the whole herd is going to go immediately into fight or flight, okay? So they're all gonna look around and their ears are gonna go up and their bodies are gonna tense and their heart rate is gonna change and their respiration is gonna change. Everything about the animal is going to change to prepare them to survive. Now, let's say that the lion has recently fed and it doesn't pay attention to the herd. It just keeps walking and it disappears into the woods. Within minutes, the herd likely will shake it off, but they're not going to run. They're not going to fear the future. They're not going to pre-grieve. They're going to keep at the watering hole because animals are able to understand a predator and go from fight or flight to rest and repair. Now, the animal that is most problematic is the human animal because the human animal is the only animal that has the ability to make what's happening in between our two ears, in our perception and in our minds, more real than what is right in front of us. And so we have an onslaught of predators, especially in 21st century society, and the predators are hard to solve for. The human brain loves math. The human brain loves predictability. It loves what it can solve for, especially when it comes to nervous system science, because the human brain's most primary purpose before any big thinking and any creativity is to keep you alive. So, in the same way that you pull your hand from a hot stove because in that moment the hot stove is the predator, or you jump out of the way of a moving car because the moving car is the predator. When you get more complicated and we talk about the human experience, predators are vague. The predator is your mother because all she does is nag you and it makes you feel like you want to explode, but you can't talk to her that way because blah, blah, blah. The predator is your body image because every time you look in the mirror, you think, oh, whatever you think, we all have our right? The predator is your partner, your children, your self-worth, your career, your money, your friends. And the predator is every moment that triggers you into that soft, tender part of yourself, whether it be childhood or the past, that you have not had yet the understanding or the tools to reckon with. So we are just constantly having the hot stove. We're constantly having the lion, and we don't know what to do. What happens in the human body is the nervous system gets stuck in fight or flight. We have neural pathways that continue to fire, although they are not really necessary. And although we kind of know we're not really in danger, doesn't matter. This is an automatic reflexive process to keep us alive. So the way I help people is, first of all, through education. There are three legs of the stool, three facets of my work. In the simplest way, it is believe, do the work, and patience and kindness for yourself. Under believe, all the knowledge, all the education, all the brain science. My most recent book called Mind Your Body, I published it last year. It is the instruction manual for how to understand your mind body. And I spent a ton of time explaining in really relatable ways the brain science and the nervous system science, because people need to understand what's happening. Because without understanding, we are terrified. When you go to a doctor and they say, I see that you're struggling. I understand. I'll give you a diagnosis. Okay. So you have panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and another doctor gives you irritable bowel syndrome and chronic fatigue, right? So here you are. Here you are with this list of diagnoses. And what good does it do you? Nothing. Because other than the medications that are doing whatever they're doing, I'm not against Western medicine at all. Like if something helps you, good for it and good for you. But the problem is, and I've worked with hundreds of thousands of people at this point around the world, when you don't know how to understand yourself, the only thing that is dumped into your emotional reservoir is more fear, confusion, and meaning, and those 3 things will keep you in constant fight or flight. So I help people through education first, and then I have a lot of tools that help excavate this stuff and help you understand that you're safe, and then I really teach about self-compassion because although it sounds light, doing any healing work without a self-compassion practice is like bailing out a boat with a hole in the bottom. You are constantly at the mercy of the worst predator ever, which is yourself. So that's like in a nutshell if I answered your question.
No, that was so good. I think basically what you were getting at, right, is this fear of fear, which is what I talk about so much in relation to anxiety disorders, especially panic disorder and agoraphobia. You really develop this fear of fear. It's not so much like the sensations, the symptoms, all the things that are happening internally. Like, yes, you can become very fearful, right, of those things, but it's more so I'm scared to be scared. And I'm like on this loop where I'm constantly scared and what you were saying, right, is I'm making meaning of it. Like I'm creating so much meaning about what's happening. So I think this is such a hard place, right, to slow down, to be able to recognize, right, without having that education. Like that education is so important to actually understand what's happening. I love the pillars that you teach on. I want to ask, you talk a lot about symptoms, right? Having meaning sort of rather than being just random. Like you're not just experiencing symptoms randomly or because there's something wrong with your body necessarily or because you're defective. So, how do you help people understand like what their symptoms might be trying to express?
What I want to say first to people is, what if literally nothing was wrong? What if there was just a miscommunication? Like, it's very important to press pause on everything you think you know. And like I still do sometimes. When I get on stage, I pick up an etch a sketch, like an old school etch a sketch. And hey, for those of you who are younger than like 25, it's like the iPad of the 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
okay? And an Etch a Sketch is a toy, and you can turn the knobs and you can make a picture on it. And anything you do, there are people who are Etch a Sketch artists that can actually really make a beautiful picture. But whatever it is, it takes up the screen, and then the way you start over, if you wanna make a new picture, is you shake it because 'cause it's got sand inside of it, and then it becomes blank again. And so I hold an Etch-a-Sketch over my head, and I say to people, everyone in the world has a million Etch-a-Sketches in their mind because there's a picture in your mind of what it means to be sick, what it means to be scared, what it means to be someone's daughter, what it means to be someone's parent, what it means to be a good person, what it means to be a success, right? We have these Etch-a-Sketches, we have these mental pictures. And I said, for just this evening, for just this moment, what I'm going to ask you to do is just shake it. Give me a clean screen for one day. Because if you can, without your biases and your questions and your fears and your resistance and your ability to be offended because you're confused, but that you think I'm saying like the pain is in your head or you're doing something wrong, like all of that is shake it and give me a blank screen. You can I always joke around, my work has a 100% misery back guarantee, meaning if you come over and you don't like what I have to say, every single thing in your life is available to you. You do not have to believe me, but if you just shake the screen and pause, you really might be able to know that this is the day that's going to change your life for the rest of your life because you are going to understand yourself on a deeper level. So, when I say that symptoms have meaning, really, what I mean is that the human brain is an absolute freaking miracle. And we all are naturally built to move toward healing. So, what that means is If you are a person whose mother had pelvic pain and whose grandmother before you, when you develop your first inkling of pelvic pain, your brain kicks in and it says, "This makes sense." And then what happens is all of your emotional overwhelm, your childhood trauma that's still there, your triggers, your daily life stressors, your personality. Oftentimes, people, perfectionistic, goodist, want to be seen as a good person, desperate for approval. Like so many of us have these personalities. You're your own worst critic, wherever you find yourself. These things that are building up inside of you that your brain and your nervous system see as predators, they come to the fore, and your brain says it makes sense that you have pelvic pain. And pelvic pain is safer than all of these very vague, amorphous issues that are coming up. So the brain goes into fight or flight. The nervous system says, okay, we need to find a way to protect you from these predators. Now we have to talk about what pain is. And this is all science, by the way. When I talk about the neuroscience, none of this is disputed by any doctor or scientist. Pain, by its very nature, in the animal, is protective. The reason pain is protective is it gets our attention and it takes us away from whatever else is happening so we can take care of ourselves and make sure we don't die. So, back in early humanity, if you cut your arm and you didn't clean it and attend to it, you would become septic and die. So, why does the nerve pain happen in your arm when you cut it? So you can stop what you're doing, because what you were doing was really important for survival. Hunting, gathering, getting your family in a shelter. But none of that is more important than your life. And so when you cut yourself, the pain said, stop, stop, stop everything you're doing. Do this first. This is the most important thing first. So what happens now in our current day is you're going through your life. It's all too much. The predators are building up. You get this tinge of pelvic pain and your whole mind goes whoosh. Oh my God, I watched my mother in bed my whole life. Oh my God. I mean, and this is a real story. My grandmother took her life over this. This is one woman who I interviewed at one point. And now it's me. So all the meaning and the fear and everything flood in, which the brain unfortunately thinks is perfect, because now all your attention is away from all those predators you can't handle, quote unquote, and is going to specialist and doctor and test and antibiotic and diagnosis until you reach a place where, sorry, either we can't find anything wrong with you, sorry that you have 10 out of 10 pain, or we can find something wrong with you and we're going to call it this diagnosis. Let's call it interstitial cystitis, because that's a big one in the pelvic world. And when you say, okay, how do I cure IC? They say, sorry, there's no cure. So we'll give you, some medications and hopefully you can live with this for the rest of your life. And these are people who come to me and they're like, in a bad way. They're like thinking about taking their lives. Like, this is a very serious situation that's happening all over the world. And when I see this, what I explain to them is what I'm telling you. And they can then pause and they can be curious. I just need you to replace your fear with curiosity, your skepticism with curiosity. I'm not looking for you to believe me. I'm looking for you to say, that's interesting. That's all I need. And then I can teach you. And so basically what happens is people understand why they put so much meaning into their symptoms, why they fear so much, why they go into these loops. And then they understand through my work how to get out of it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that. Okay. So my brain is going in this direction because you mentioned something like typically people, or oftentimes I should say people who struggle with a lot of this are like the high achievers, the perfectionists, the goers, the doers, like the people who are like, I can figure anything out, right? Problem solvers. So I think, I don't know, I would love your thoughts. I think this was definitely me. And I think so much of what I didn't recognize when I was struggling with panic and agoraphobia was I was doing all these things and trying to sort of make up for things because there was so much that I had suppressed. And there was just so much that I never allowed myself to process and to feel. And so I'm curious, how much of chronic pain, all of these things, do you feel like really stems from a lot of suppression?
All of it. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit more about the theories and the brain science because it'll speak right to this. So, every one of us, and by the way, this has nothing to do with if you characterize yourself as being a symptomatic person, every single one of us has what I like to describe as an internal emotional reservoir. So, you can just picture like a clear science beaker that exists between your belly button and your chest, and it holds, and this, by the way, once again, non disputable science, everything that you don't have the capacity to feel. So, for example, you are whatever you are, a mother, a professional, a spouse, a child of someone. You have responsibilities in life. And so, if you had to feel the vestiges of every single thing that happens to you throughout your day, you would be absolutely paralyzed. So you can't. And the brain knows this, which is why the quote defense mechanism of repression exists. So defense mechanisms, whether you know, all the Freudian psychology, I know there's a lot of people who have a lot of feelings about it, but its very nature, there's no dispute over the fact that defense mechanisms exist because they are adaptive. Like, so the human animal is always looking to adapt, right? So we can continue to survive. So the reason repression protects us is because we can't possibly deal with the number of things that are coming at us in terms of emotional, because we wouldn't be able to function. So you are going to feel some small percentage of the things that happen to you. The rest get repressed. It's perfect. There's nothing wrong with that. However, you got this emotional reservoir and things are getting dumped into it all the time. The big five that I like to talk about are rage, shame, despair, grief, and terror. So these are things that are not light, right? You might say, I'm bummed out, but you don't oftentimes have coffee with a friend and say, I'm in despair. And it doesn't feel socially acceptable. It doesn't feel like you even want to go there. So all of us have these feelings. So they go into this reservoir and they build up and they build up over time. When the reservoir starts to overflow, here's what happens in the human brain. It's knocking on the door of consciousness because all of your repressed emotions are unconscious. So you might have a sense of how you feel, but you do not know, nobody knows the extent of it. When they start knocking on the door of consciousness, what the brain understands is that you are going to be receiving information about exactly how stuck or sad or enraged or terrified you are. That is seen as a huge predator because let's say your life depends on functioning and working and parenting and whatever. If you were to know how drowning in these feelings you are, you wouldn't be able to do any of those things. The nervous system goes into fight or flight. There's a predator in the room. There's a lion on the savannah. And then what happens? It sends signals of inflammation, muscle constriction and spasm, neuropathy, and anxiety and other physical and emotional signals into the body. Now what happens? You get that feeling that our ancient ancestors got when they cut their arm. You get a feeling. You get a pain. You get a panic. You get a dizziness, a vertigo. There's so many things that happen, right? Now what happens? All the things that were triggering you and causing more dump into this reservoir are paused because now you have to take care of yourself. Your pain has told you, now it's time to pause all those things. It's time to survive. Look within. So, one of the best examples I have is I'm not going to say who, but there's a person in my life who was sexually assaulted. And as she got older, she was invited to a rape crisis fundraiser. And her best friends were inviting her, and she said yes. And she was not thinking about this assault, which was a very traumatic assault because it was how she lost her virginity. So it was very, very deep. And the night of the fundraiser, she was getting ready to go, and she got a migraine so badly that she was throwing up and on the floor of her bathroom. And she obviously called and said, I can't go. And years later, after having a terrible migraine disorder, 10 to 15 migraines a month, she found my work. And as she was doing it, she said, I know why I couldn't go to that crisis center. I really need to be with this little girl who was hurt. And in doing so, She has not had a migraine in 4 years, and she's thriving, and she's able to talk to her daughter about assault as she goes to college. Like, it's such powerful work. But the reason people need to understand this process is that it is a compassionate brain and nervous system. It is looking to protect you from these repressed emotions. But what I teach people is how to safely, methodically, and manageably bring this reservoir out little by little. That's what JournalSpeak is. That's what all of my tools are. That's what my membership community is because we do it together. That's what we have coaching. We have all these things we help people with. And through this process, they learn that they are safe to feel. And what's incredible, and I'm telling you right now, Shannon, if this were just that you would feel better, it would be enough. However, these people, once they, and me and everyone I know that does this, once they feel enough that they need to feel, the nervous system goes, oh my God, are you serious? This isn't a dangerous predator? I can be with my assault? I can be with a 16-year-old who lost her virginity that way? I can really be there and not die? I see. We don't need migraines. Migraines are nothing except the protective function of pain. They go. And this is not conjecture. First of all the science is catching up. There are studies out of Harvard. Like, this is, all of them are listed in my book. If people really want to deep, nerdy dive into the science, I have it all. This is a phenomena that will change your life so profoundly you have no idea, because once the brain and the nervous system are regulated, you do not have chronic issues.
Yeah, I for sure believe you. I mean, I went through this myself. I'm living proof of this, and it's so much of what I teach as well. And I always tell my students anxiety is this protector, but so much of what we have inside of us is this protection system. And when you don't understand it and you put so much meaning to all the things that are happening, it really puts you in this fear cycle that's so hard to get out of. So I want to shift and talk about journal speak because I want to give it the time it deserves. I'll tell you, like, and be very honest, I've never been a big fan of journaling. Like, back when I was struggling, of course, that was something that was recommended to me. And I think there are so many different ways that journaling is presented. And I think people often have an idea of, like, when you say journaling, their brain immediately goes to, like, oh, yeah, like I've been told, or I've been told, like, to do positive affirmations. Like, so I think everyone sort of has a version. But I think your version of it so hits home just in the sense of I listened to you the first time I listened to you, I was like, "Oh my gosh." It was so weird because it was like something that I just sort of inherently knew to do and something that I had been doing and like my own version of it and found so much like release from it. And it was so incredibly helpful. And when I heard you talk about it, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, this is journaling. I think this is the way that journaling is sort of meant to be. So, can you tell us what is journal speak?
Yes, well, that's a really, really good description of the confusion over journaling versus journal speak. I will tell you, in retrospect, I created journal speak so many years ago. Now it's over 20 years ago. But in retrospect, I wish I didn't use the word journal in it. The only reason is because it's so easy to confuse it, because journal speak is not journaling, not the way that you have been taught. So I'll just quickly tell you the origin story because I think that is really helpful to people. So, my chronic pain journey, if you will, has two distinct chapters. The first is when I learned about Dr. Sarno's work when I was in grad school and understood it enough that I kind of set aside my diagnosis and all of the drama. And I went on and lived my life. And I had two out of the three of my children. And I got married and I was living, according to me, the exact life that I wanted. And when my son was 10 months old, he was toddling around in a little baby walker, and I wanted to move the walker from the deck to the driveway. This is not a heavy walker. This was not an incident that should have, in a healthy person, caused any problems. But as I was moving it, I felt what I can only describe as like a hot knife dragging through my back. It was the most stunning pain I've ever felt in my life. and I could not stand up. I was like in the shape of an L, and I called out to my ex-husband and I said, "I something happened. Like something's really wrong." And I kind of hobbled into the house, and that began the lowest year of my life. It was not only a pain spiral, it was a shame spiral because I was in horrible chronic pain, but I was also in horrible shame and regret because I took on the whole thing. I was like, what a fool you are. You had children, and now look what you've done. You have ruined yourself. You are broken. You are not going to be able to, you're ruining other people's lives now because now you can't parent properly. So it was very, very dark. And I was in 3 days a week physical therapy, electric stim treatments on my back. Now I was on opioids. Now I was on more muscle relaxers and steroids. Just every single stop you can pull out, and I was in terrible chronic pain. So this kind of culminated in this afternoon. I was taking my children out to a meal, and it was at sort of a deli where you eat, but then you pay at the counter. And I was trying to pay, and my kids were 1 and not even 3. I have 20. My first two are 22 months apart. And the 1-year-old had just learned to walk, and they were wild. They were grabbing things, and they were like, "Can I have this?" Or like whatever a child says, and like screaming. And I was so overwhelmed and embarrassed, and all of my underlying reservoir of just shame and dread and grief, whatever it was, who knows? But I felt my back starting to lock up. And I grabbed my toddlers by the wrists and I started walking to my car. And it was a very active parking lot. And by the time I got to my car, my back was in such a state of pain and spasm and locked, like my muscles were locked, that I could not get my children into the car. So I stood there in this parking lot, and I just remember leaning my forehead against the window of my car and just crying. Like, it was such a low moment. It's still to this day probably the lowest moment of my life, and I don't know how long I stood there, and my kids just kind of went limp because they were like, when kids have this intuitive sense, like, this is not a time to whine. Like they just, like, figured it out, like the animals that they are with their mama bear, and I do not really remember how I got them in the car or got them home or bathed them or got them to bed, but somehow I did. And when I finished with that, I sat on my bed and I looked out the window of my bedroom, and it was this beautiful night, really clear. I could see all the stars, and I surrendered. And I said, I don't know if Dr. Sarno is right with all this mind body stuff, which right now feels like bullshit, or if I am broken forever and I just have to accept that. But, mess with me, don't mess with my kids. Like, I endangered my children today, and now I need to be stronger. I need to figure this out. So, at the time, Dr. Sarno was still practicing in New York City, and I very luckily got an appointment with him, and I went in and I wrote him a novel of every time my back hurt. When I move, when I this, and in the morning, in the evening, when I lift, and and I'm such an A student. Like, I am so one of those. I am the person you describe, the perfectionist, the high standards, all of it. And I slid it solemnly across the desk to Dr. Sarno, and he literally, I will never forget this moment, he took it, and while still looking at me, he threw it in the garbage, which was next to his desk in this metal garbage can, so it made kind of a clink, and he said, "Come to my office, let me physically examine you." He gave me a physical exam, he looked at all my films, and he said, "Yeah, you have a very severe spondy." He's like, "You have an an extreme abnormality of the lower spine, but you've just explained to me where your pain is. Sometimes it's on the left side, sometimes it's on the right. Sometimes you feel like it's up in your scapula. Sometimes you feel like it's down your leg. Sometimes you feel like it's in your shin splint. Sometimes it feels like sciatica." He said, "You can go to the best doctors at Mayo, at Harvard, wherever you want to go. Not one doctor is going to look at you with a straight face and say that this abnormality that we're looking at on this screen could account for the way your pain is showing up." He said, "You have something called TMS. Now, I wouldn't worry too much for your audience if you're new to this to try to deconstruct TMS, but I will explain it to you, and it's all explained in my book. But it stands for tension myoneural syndrome, and all is that to say is that it is an umbrella under which many, many chronic issues reside because it is sort of a shorthand to explain all the brain science that I just spent time talking to you about. He said, when you have TMS, sometimes it comes as back pain, sometimes it comes as migraines, sometimes it comes as anxiety, sometimes it comes as fatigue. It manifests in all different ways because it's all coming from this same place of this nervous system dysregulation. And he said, I know it feels like you have a problem because of this abnormality, but it is a normal abnormality. It is not hurting you. We need to get your emotional reservoir to the point where you can function and be a normal person in this world. And I said, okay. I was so desperate. I was willing to do anything. And so I said, tell me what to do. And he said, one of the most effective ways to get to the places where your brain does not want you to go is to journal. And I was just like, all right, buddy, I can't lift my children. I barely can breathe when my pain is bad. You want me to journal? Like, I truly, so for anyone who thinks this is like the craziest thing, sister, I'm with you. I thought it was the weirdest, dumbest, most outlandish thing I'd ever heard. I'm just gonna tell you honestly, like, I was like, I can't believe I came into the city for this. And he said, if you are really desperate, if you really are willing, what I'm telling you is this is what's happening in your brain and your nervous system. You need to get in touch with the things that your brain thinks are predators. And I was like, okay. So I was journaling. I was playing my tapes. Woe is me, my childhood. And I was doing all the things, and it felt like a whole lot of nothing. But I was dedicated, and I was like, I'm going to do this. And then one day, I put motherhood on the top of the page. And I started writing things that are true about I have two kids in cribs, two kids in diapers. You know, this wasn't the plan. I'm overwhelmed. I wasn't planning to have them so close together. My husband at the time was like super, super workaholic. I was alone with them all the time. So I was writing things that are real. I was telling a story on the page of what is true for me. And I had a moment which will forever be one of the most important moments in my life, which is like, call it my higher self, call it my, call it God, call it the universe, call it whatever it is that you believe in. I had a moment of clarity. And that moment of clarity said to me, you're lying. And I looked at the moment of clarity and I said, I'm not lying. This is all true stuff about my life. And the understanding that I had in that moment was this might be true stuff about your life, but this is not the stuff that is causing your nervous system to go into fight or flight. What is it? And like literally, I have told this story 100 million times. And still, when I get to this part, I get teary eyed because it was such a moment of bravery for me because I had to say the thing that I could not say. And you also have to realize this was over 20 years ago. There was not an internet culture of moms telling the truth. There was not, Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and influencers. You only knew what your friends were willing to admit to you over a glass of wine. Like it was not a time where people said things. And I wrote on that piece of paper, I hate being a mother. And I just sat there and looked at it, and, like, you have to realize the gravity of me saying that because I begged and wished for these kids, and then I was told I couldn't have them, and then I had them anyway, and I had the life I asked for, and I was totally drowning in it. I was like and then I just said, I don't know if you swear on the podcast, you can bleep me out. I said, "Fuck it," and I just went for it, and I was like, "Okay, here's the deal. I hate this, and not only do I hate this, I hate my kids. I had the wrong kids. They are brats, they scream, they aren't what I asked for, and not to mention they don't even look like me because they look like my ex-husband, who at the time was really on my shit list," and I went on, and I really didn't care anymore, and something opened in me, and I just went on, and it evolved. I kind of get to this place, and I still have chills all over my body when I tell this story, and I go, "Wait a second, wait a second, wait a second. Somehow this doesn't feel true anymore. What's going on? I don't hate my kids." And it was like, I hate my parents. And then I went in on my parents and I was like, F those people and all their mistakes. And I was so messed up and I was so lonely. And then I went, no, my parents. And then, oh man, did it move on to myself. Yeah, you can blame your kids, you can blame your parents, you can blame your husband, but you know who the real culprit is? You. You're a piece of garbage. You can't do anything. You're a failure. And I just didn't care anymore. And I just kept writing. And where I landed, my hand to God, I could not have gotten here with all of the, therapy in the world. Even though I totally love therapy, I'm a therapist, I believe in therapy, but it was a personal moment. And I got to a place where I realized something that I had long repressed, which is when I was a little girl, maybe about 11, I was so sad. There was things going on in my life. And I remember making a sacred promise to myself. And that was one day you're going to get out from under these people who make terrible decisions and rule your life. And one day you are going to be the mother and you are going to be perfect. And you are going to have these beautiful children and they're going to look to you with such love because you have such love for them. And you are going to heal the wounds of this moment. You have the power to help me, 11-year-old version of myself. And I sat there with that legal pad that I had been journaling on, and I just wept for how beautiful that realization was, that the reason I felt like a failure and the reason I hated my kids is because they weren't healing the wounds of my childhood. 2 toddlers are not the recipe for healing the wounds of your childhood. And I just sat there and thought, okay, this is what he means. And I ripped it up and I threw it away because who the hell needs to ever look at that whole trajectory again? Because half of it, 99% of it, didn't even stay true. One thing was just a portal to the next and the next and the next. And the only true thing I left with that day was compassion for my sweet self, where I really had been holding these kids to a different standard than kids should be held. So, this is not everyone's story, but this is my story. I woke up the next day and my back pain was 80% gone, never to return. And I then said, this isn't journaling, this is journal speak. I am speaking this into the universe and I don't care anymore. And I journal spoke on every topic I could think of. And I started with the raw, unapologetic id, like the truth that doesn't stay the truth, but I had to go there, which is like, I'm not doing this anymore. I quit. I'm never going there again. So I could then get to, oh, but I like going there, but it had to go into that process. And when I was done, I would throw it out. And I would then sit and I didn't meditate back then. Now my prescription involves meditation for sure. But I would just sit and I would be like, you're good. You're okay. You're saving your own life here. And through this process, I eliminated every chronic symptom I had. And I went back to Dr. Sarno and I go, dude, you're never going to believe it. And he goes, oh, yeah, try me. And I said, I'm well. And he said, I know, honey, this is the way it works. And he invited me to start lecturing with him at NYU because I was young. I was so young. And I was a woman and I was a therapist. And I was like a person who could explain this in a different way than he could. And I had come up with these tools through my own recovery. And that began, the rest of my life. I started writing books. I had 18 years in private practice and then the podcast and the YouTube. I want to have everyone in the world understand this work.
Yeah, it's so immensely valuable. And I'm just thinking, I know we have to wrap up, but I'm just thinking of those who are like, okay, you want me to sit down and write this shit out. And I mean, I obviously want people to go and look at your stuff and have an understanding of what this actually means so that they can practice it in a healthy way. Cause this is also is not the first step, go do this. But if people are like, I am just so worried that if I let myself feel, if I let myself go there, it's going to make things worse. What would you say to somebody who's thinking that right now?
This is where you find me as the love bucket that gives you the hard truth. Okay. So the reason I call myself a love bucket is you've never met anyone more compassionate than me. We are human. Everybody is doing their best. And do you want this jail you're living in? Do you want what you've got? Because when you keep doing what you're doing, you keep getting what you're getting. And I will propose that this is hard and it's painful. But if you do it with the right support, you can do this. And life is a choice between what hurts and what hurts worse. Life is not a choice between good or bad, happy or sad. Life is about understanding that everything is hard, so you get to choose your hard. And the way you're living right now is hard. It's harder. And this, what I'm proposing, like I said, when I used to teach this 15 years ago, I would feel a little irresponsible saying what I'm saying now because I didn't have that much support to offer. I had a private practice. Most of the time it was full. Now I have an international membership community. I have a slew of amazing trained coaches. Christina Sarno, Dr. Sarno, and I are close colleagues. We co-wrote with my partner, Lisa, a practitioner training program. We train doctors, nurses, therapists, acupuncturists, teachers, educators, clergy. We train all around the world. With the right support, I promise you, you can do this and you will set yourself free. And as you're doing it, when it's hard, what you say is, this feels like the worst. But then you pause and you say, but do I want that? The life I had before I knew about it. And you're going to say, no, there's more out there for me. And I want to tell everybody who's listening, the pain, the symptom, the anxiety, the panic, believe it or not, it's the biggest, littlest part. It will bring you through this door, but I promise you, I have a podcast with hundreds and hundreds of episodes, and I have interviewed people from around the world, from all walks of life, and there's one commonality between all these people, and it's never failed to be a part of the interview. They fall on their knees in tearful gratitude for their pain or their lowest moment because the pain brought them into this, but the life they live of limitless possibilities because they are no longer at the whim of their nervous system dragging them around by their neck with childhood trauma and things unsaid is astonishing. And when I look at my 3 amazing children, they're amazing, sure. I could list their accomplishments, but that's not even it. They are my people. They are my best friends. I freaking love them. And you know why they love me? Because I did not parent them through the lens of my own dysfunction. I knew who I was when I was raising them. And by the way, many parents come to me and they say, I've already made it. I've already messed it up. And I say, doesn't matter. Your children are desperate to forgive you. Your mother, your husband, your best friend, your colleagues, all they want to do is connect. Everybody has an imperative to connect because it's the human condition. When you can understand yourself and show up differently, it's amazing how your life can change at any stage.
Yeah. Oh, I so agree with you. Okay, Nicole, if people want to connect with you, learn more about all of the work that you do in Journal Speak, where can they find you?
Easy enough. My name is Nicole Sachs, NicoleSachs, NicoleSachs.com. Come over. If you need one-on-one help, click the coaching tab. If you want to work with me and my co-facilitators in global community where we meet 3 times a month on Zoom and every day in our private community, join a membership. If you want to read my book, it's called Mind Your Body. It is the instruction manual for this. You can get it anywhere you get books. Listen to the podcast, The Cure for Chronic Pain, on any podcast platform. It is free. You have hundreds of episodes. Go to my YouTube channel, which is The Cure for Chronic Pain. It is free. Tons of content. Go to my Instagram at Nicole Sachs LCSW. It is free. You can sit and be with all the stuff I have. There, I have courses. So if you're not ready to join community and you want to do it asynchronously because you just want to learn, I have Freedom from Chronic Pain and Freedom from an Anxious Life. Anxiety is not a disorder. It is a natural function of human beings. And if you understand it, you can know how to transform it. You can know how to transcend it, and you can appreciate it for what it is, which is trying to keep you safe. There's so many things to learn. And if you are a practitioner and this is lighting you up, just go to my website. When you click on courses, the Sarno Sachs solution, you can get 18 3/4 CEs for your profession, and you can learn how to bring this to your population.
I love it. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
I hope you loved this episode of A Healthy Push. If you have, I'd be so grateful if you could leave me a rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. This helps people to find the show and get the support they need. And if you know someone who could use a little push, be sure to share this episode with them. And for even more support, head over to ahealthypush.com for show notes and loads of tips, tools, and inspiration to help you on your recovery journey. I'll see you next week.